Welcome back, friends. Welcome back. There's a new psychological thriller now playing on the West End stage here in London. In a Forest, Dark and Deep is a powerful two-hander about sibling rivalry and dysfunctional relationships. On stage for the full 100 minutes and delivering stellar performances to boot are American actor Matthew Fox and British actress Olivia Williams, who play brother and sister. Matthew, Golden Globe and Emmy nominee and Hollywood heartthrob to boot, he's making his West End debut, but he's probably best known for his role as Dr. Jack Shepherd in the award-winning TV series Lost. Olivia Williams, no stranger to the British stage, has also starred in many television dramas and films, notably Roman Polanski's hit movie The Ghostwriter. They are both here in the studio right now. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
How do you both start with you, ladies first, for a first
Thank
one.
you.
How do you summarise, we heard about the sibling rivalry and so on there, how do you summarise what this play is about to you?
My character is clearing out her cabin in the woods. She asks her brother to come and help her. And the play takes place over one evening, and he very, very slowly and painfully discovers why she's emptying out the cabin in such a hurry. There are, on the way, many sibling rows, but it's a real old-fashioned psychological thriller. There's a real old Agatha Christie element to it as to why is she behaving so strangely, and what's in the file cabinet.
Ah, you've got to go to the theatre to find out.
Exactly.
Matthew, what drew you to this play? Made you say yes?
Initially just reading the script. I read the script last May, really responded to it, loved the way that Neil Labute writes, and thought that it had a, that it really worked even in the form that it was in then. I mean, it's a new play, so it's since gone through a lot of changes. We made a lot of changes during our 5 weeks of rehearsal.
So your name should be on the credits as co-authors as well.
No. I mean, Neil being directing his own material, I think that was one of the really great things about that experience, was that when you have a writer who is directing his own material, he was very, very accommodating about once we had the piece up and we were blocked and we were moving through the piece and doing run-throughs, starting to feel the pace of it, and places where it might feel repetitive, and sort of condensing things and making it tighter. And Neil's been very smart about that, and I think it's a pretty lean and mean show now.
Lean and mean show. Originally, you found it distasteful. It says. It says.
Yes. Well, I have to confess. You know, Neil's writing is known for its distasteful characters, and it's a problem that. How do you write about hateful people and make people interested enough to stay to the end of the play? And my husband's a writer too, and cites Neil as one of his influences. So I thought this is the chance to find out what's going on in my husband's head as well as Neil Labute's. And I'm none the wiser. Both my husband and Neil Labute are cuddly, sweet, kind, generous people who produce these really evil people in quite dreadful situations. But going through the psychological journey of these two, brother and sister, and whether there is any redemption to how cruel they can be to each other, has been a real journey of discovery. And we found this brother and sister relationship through hard graft. You know, I think anyone who saw us go through it would agree that we worked hard to make it real. And
Did you find that tough, becoming brother and sister on stage?
Yeah, I mean, there was a process to it, and I always felt upon meeting Olivia for the very first time that we were going to, that we had the right energy with each other in that respect. And I thought, you know, it is important. These people are so fundamentally different, Bobby and Betty, in the play on every level, politically, socioeconomically, I mean, education-wise. They're really coming from two polar opposites. So I thought it was really crucial just in the casting of the two of us that we physically could be believable as brother and sister, and that we would start to find this relationship that was based on history and emotion and past. And we worked really hard for that. We had a lot of help. We had people that came in and helped us really work on trying to find that relationship, and and we're both very happy because we get a lot of comments that part of it is very, very believable, and that people buy right into that, even though these two people are so fundamentally different.
And because you're brother and sister, then you do this presumably with an American accent.
Yes, and
because you're brother and sister.
I've done an American accent before on film, but as you know, filming is in tiny snippets, so you can really control your accent only for a minute at a time at most. But having Matthew right there for an hour and 40 minutes demonstrating how it should be done, I worked pretty hard to make it consistent and believable that because I couldn't even say we were from different parts of America. We're meant to be related to each other. Yeah. So it was a tough challenge, but I hope I've nailed it. Some Americans have seen it said I got it right.
And do you find it, Matthew? Do you find it exhausting? I mean, the 100 minutes. Do you feel a bit knackered by the end of it or not?
Yes, absolutely. Especially on the Wednesdays and Saturdays in which we do two shows.
Of course.
I do find that those Wednesday and Saturday evening shows are really extraordinary for Olivia and I, because about halfway through that second show, we're both so exhausted that you sort of reach a point where you're free of any kind of thought, or you're really kind of naked up there. And I think that some of the best things happen when you reach that point. So yes, I mean, it's a really demanding piece of material, and we both get to the end and give each other a hug and say, God, we made it through again. And but I also find it incredibly exhilarating. It's been a fantastic experience. And
you're moving on now, but presumably Lost was an important stage in your career.
No, absolutely. It was a huge chapter of my life personally, my family's life, living in Hawaii for 6 years. We have two children. Our youngest we moved to Hawaii when he was 2 years old, so the largest portion of his conscious life has been spent in Hawaii, and now we're moving on to a new and different area of the United States. And then professionally, I mean, it was obviously far more successful than anybody ever dreamed of going into it. I mean, anytime you do a television series, you start by doing a pilot, and because you believe in the potential of it, but you never have any expectation of what it could turn into. And the way that Lost kind of went globally, and the kind of people that were paying attention to it, it was amazing. It was a great experience.
Fantastic. Do you think of yourself as first and foremost stage, film?
It would be churlish now to say I was a stage actor, because I've probably spent more time doing film, but that's where my instincts are, and that was what was so extraordinary about coming back to this, having been making movies for 3 years, to come back and realise there was no way to hide with this. We don't even go off stage. And with film, you get used to going,
do you go off stage for an interval in the middle or not?
No, there's no interval. No. It's an hour and 40 minutes, no interval, and my character doesn't leave the stage. And, I've got a little used to saying, I'm sorry, can we stop? I have forgotten my lines, or I fear I might have an eyelash. And you can go and do a retake in a movie or on TV, and there is literally nowhere to hide.
Nowhere to hide.
I could even crawl behind the sofa if I was desperate, but that's about as far as it goes.
And and you, of course, won an accolade from People magazine, didn't you, Matthew? As one of the 50 most beautiful people in the world.
Yeah, that was years ago, though. I've since fallen off those lists.
But it's nice to have it as a souvenir.
Oh, I don't know.
But you wanted to move on from television, and so, I mean, is theatre more of a priority than film, or film more of a priority than?
I've been dreaming for a long time of a situation where I do a film and a play a year, or I mix those two things up, and I say that I've done 2 television shows that lasted 6 years, and I really have always dreamed of a film theater type relationship, because it just gives me more freedom over when I'm working and when I can decide to take 2 weeks and go on a vacation with my wife and my kids. I mean, when you work for a big company on a television show, they're really telling you exactly when you're working, and I'm looking forward to a future where hopefully, if I get the right opportunities, then I'm doing a film and a play here and there. And if I decide that I'd like to take 3 months off over the summer, and before I start looking for the next project, then I can do that. I just basically want more control in my life, really.
Terrific. Well, good luck with the play.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And all you do, and we'll welcome you back to
Thank you.
salute you again.
Very good.
Matthew Fox there and Olivia Williams talking to me earlier. Now, the Japanese authorities this week announced that the disaster at the Fukushima nuclear power plant is now a level 7 incident, the highest measure, the same as Chernobyl. You might think that the disaster might turn people off nuclear power, and indeed some countries are rethinking their programs. But for one leading green activist, it seems to have done the opposite. To the fury perhaps of some of his colleagues, George Monbiot, one of the best-known environmentalists in the world, has written that, quote, "The crisis at Fukushima has converted me to the cause of nuclear power." So how come? Well, George is here now to explain all these things. Welcome, George.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you with us. What was the cause of Fukushima leading to this conversion?
Well, it was a perfect storm, wasn't it? A really shoddy old plant, built in the worst possible place on a fault line and a tsunami-prone coast, managed by a company which fell short in all its duties, cut corners, managed it appallingly, gets hit by a force 9 earthquake and a monster tsunami, takes out the power supply, causes partial meltdown, causes explosions, and has caused a terrible amount of distress and disruption and, you know, evacuation and all the rest of it. And yet it remains the case that, as far as we know, and we've got a pretty good idea on this so far, no one has yet received a dose of radiation known to be lethal. And this really got me thinking. I thought, well, you know, this is horrible. What's happening in Fukushima is horrible. But look at what's happening, say, in China, for example. We're in the coal industry. Every year, 2,400 people die in mining accidents just to extract coal alone. And that's to say nothing of the hundreds of thousands who contract lung diseases, horrible, horrible diseases, which often cause a very prolonged and extremely painful and unpleasant death. And what we have to do as human beings, but also particularly as environmentalists and as humanitarians, is to consider the consequences of any particular policy we do in the roundest possible way. And if the likely outcome, as it seems to be, is that we get out of nuclear power as a result of Fukushima and go instead into more coal burning, which seems already to be happening in some parts of the world, then the result will be that far more people will be harmed and killed by that.
So that, in fact, you've come to the conclusion that nuclear power is here to stay, should be here to stay, and that the alternatives are worse, not better.
I don't like nuclear power, and I'm deeply suspicious of the nuclear industry, which has got a very bad record of corner cutting and messing with paperwork and messing with radioactive pollution, all of that. It's a bad option, nuclear power, but fossil fuels are a far worse option. And they're a worse option partly because of the people immediately killed in the extraction and the processing of them, partly because of the local pollution that they cause, which is again devastating to people's health and devastating to the environment. We're talking about sulfur pollution, heavy metals, also quite a lot of radioactive pollution, more than an average nuclear power plant is produced by coal power plants for the same amount of energy. But then, of course, the big one is global warming. Now, we are quite rightly concerned about the evacuation, which is necessitated by these nuclear accidents, and also, of course, about the massive problem of decommissioning old nuclear plant. But think of the evacuations which climate change could cause over far wider areas of the world. Think of the problem of decommissioning the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which seems almost insoluble. And it's not that, you know, any of this is to suggest that nuclear power is a good option, but the alternatives are just far, far worse.
And obviously the nuclear situation, the anti-nuclear situation, has been very, very powerfully put forward, because you've said yourself in these 3 weeks that you've been re-examining the situation, that you've said that in fact you were misled, you were lied to, and there was the anti-nuclear movement to which I once belonged has misled the world about the impacts of radiation on human health. And your very trenchant example here was that experts that you trusted invented evidence that nearly 1 million people died of radiation poisoning after the 1986 Chernobyl meltdown. Fantastically powerful anti-nuclear point. 1 million people died. But you say now that if you look at it now, just 134 people suffered acute radiation. 134, and not all of those died. Now, why was there such a powerful anti-nuclear lobby that that even hypnotized you for a moment?
Well, I think the problem is that we all tend to associate with people who believe the same things as we believe. And ideas circulate within those closed communities, and they tend to then get exaggerated and inflated. And yeah, I completely accept that, you know, radioactive pollution is very dangerous stuff, but the kind of figures and the kind of claims that many of the people who have been talking about it have been making have no grounding in science whatsoever. We just have to have some perspective here, and we have to be rooted in science. I mean, what is this environment movement if it is not rooted in science? And as an environmentalist, I feel that unless we can justify and support all the positions we take with good, solid science, then it's not just that we run the risk of misleading other people, we run the risk of wasting our own lives. Why waste your life chasing unicorns, doing things which are responding to myths rather than to necessary moral imperatives?
Well, thank you very much for that. We'll turn to that subject on another day and so on, but thank you for sharing these stop-press thoughts with us, George.
Thank you very much, David.
Our thanks there to George Monbiot. Now, more and more people are fleeing war-torn Libya. Originally, the bulk of people braving the seas and crossing the borders into neighbouring countries were migrant workers. Now, Libyans are seeking refuge from the violence abroad. They are making their ways into Egypt, Tunisia, Niger, and in smaller numbers are fleeing to countries such as Algeria, Chad and Sudan, countries not often thought of as safe havens. The numbers have reached a critical mass. Up to 500,000 people are reported to have fled Libya, making it one of the largest migration crises since the first Gulf War in 1990. Well, joining me now from Geneva is Ambassador William Lacey Swing, Director General of the International Organization for Migration, which has been trying to alleviate the refugee crisis in North Africa. Ambassador, welcome. It's very good to have you with us. How is it going in the sense that there are emergencies all the time? Are you winning the battle of migration at the moment, or is it tough?
I think your initial remarks are exactly right. There are about 513,000 primarily migrant workers who've fled Libya. Since the no-fly zone was put in, we are seeing somewhat greater numbers of Libyans, but it still is basically a migrant worker crisis. We've been able to repatriate about 110,000 with 846 charter flights. The difficulty is it's very hard to forecast how many more might come out. I mean, you know, it could be 100 or several 100,000 who would still come out because, as you know, in a country of 6 million people, there were about 2.5 million migrant workers. And there are a number who probably would still like to come out. Just as we speak, we have a boat on its way from Misurata to Benghazi that left just after midnight, taking about 1,000 migrant workers back to Benghazi, where they'll go by road to Egypt. And we'll have to return on Saturday and bring more out because of the fighting there. The difficulty will be that the money at some point gets very scarce, and we have to cut back the number of people we're taking out, and that of course causes greater tension and security problems in the transit camps. We have about 6,000 people on any given day waiting for transport out of Tunisia, for example, and about 3,000 or 4,000 coming out of the Egypt camp.
And when you mention about the boat that has taken off, as it were, I'm using airline terminology there, but that the boat is taking 1,000 people to freedom from where they are now. Where will they all go? You mentioned some of them going to Egypt, but presumably Egypt is not the sole destination. What other destinations do the migrants wish for?
That's right. No, they're going from Egypt back to other countries. Look, we've taken people back with our partner, our very traditional partner, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. We, from the beginning, have been partners on this. We're working together still. We've taken people back to about 41 countries, primarily in Africa and Asia. There's another issue, though, that I think we should focus on, which is what happens at the other end. We also have our offices in each of these countries there with the host government to receive these people home. But as you know, they're going back to the same unemployment that drove them to Libya in the first place in search of a job. So we already have to start thinking about the reintegration of these nationals. Tunisia alone has taken back 35,000 of its own to conditions of unemployment. So this is already in our thinking, the next phase, once we finish with the repatriation issue.
And Mr. Berlusconi, the Prime Minister of Italy, for once quoted on some subject other than underage sex and so on, answered the question, could an immigration crisis split the EU? He said, either Europe is something that's real and concrete or it isn't, and in that case it's better to go back to each going our own way and letting everyone follow his own policies and egotism. Could the result of all of this crisis be something as dramatic as that, or do you think he's going too far?
I'm glad you raised this question because it allows me to make what I think is a fundamental point for your viewing public. You know, it has remained basically a migrant worker crisis. Very few people have gone northward or anywhere else other than home. 513,000 people have come out, and virtually none of them have gone anywhere but back to their country of origin. You can count the 15 or 20,000 who've headed north to Lampedusa and on to points perhaps in Italy, but these are primarily Tunisians and increasingly in the last days, Libyans. But the migrant workers who've come out have gone through a very difficult time and are eager to go home. So it is still essentially not a European crisis. It's basically a migrant crisis affecting primarily the developing world.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Ambassador, and bringing us up to date there on the refugee situation. We appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we began with Libya and we've ended with Libya this week, and that's it for this week. My thanks to all of my guests. Do join me again in 7 days' time for another Frost Over the World. Until then, goodbye for now.